Tashi Delay, everyone, and welcome back to Tibet Talks. I'm Ashwin Verghese of the International Campaign for Tibet. Thank you to all of you for joining us for today's episode, and thank you to all of you who were there for our special series last month on the four principal commitments of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We hope that all of you enjoyed watching and listening to those episodes, and we saw a very positive response from people across our audience. Thank you to all of you for helping to make that such a great success. Now we're back to kind of our normal programming for Tibet Talks. We're back to monthly episodes. And on this month's episode, we'll be discussing Tibet's rivers. Now, the rivers of Tibet are beautiful, but they are also life sustaining and vital to the entire region. In fact, up to 2 billion people across Asia depend on the healthy flow of Tibet's rivers. The Chinese government, however, has openly declared its plan to build dozens more dams on Tibet's rivers in the decade ahead. Extensive damming will give China the capacity to turn on and off the tap of water from Tibet's rivers. Coupled with fear of food and economic instability, China's control of the waters of Tibet makes for an increasingly volatile situation for downstream countries. This is not just speculation. According to a report from the Stimson Center in 2019, China withheld water behind dams for 6 months while downstream countries experienced a devastating drought. So, this is an incredibly important issue. Ignoring China's water agenda will grant the Chinese government another tool to establish outsized regional control over downstream nations, literally and diplomatically. Last month, the U.S. State Department convened a panel in partnership with the International Water Management Institute at the World Water Week conference in Stockholm, Sweden. And this panel focused on addressing water security challenges in the Himalayan region. ICT was proud to be a sponsor of this panel, and our own government relations director, Franz Massner, was able to attend. Recently, Franz spoke with two of the panelists at that event. They are Seshu Dolma, the founder of the Mountain Resiliency Project, and Lobsang Yanso, a senior researcher at the International Tibet Network. So Franz spoke to the two of them again recently for a discussion about the water panel and about Tibet's rivers and the importance of taking action now. So let's listen to that conversation, and then afterward, we'll hear more from Franz.
And thank you for doing this and uh, being here. I know we have met before and had the pleasure of talking together about some of these related topics. So I really appreciate you coming and sharing your knowledge and expertise with our full audience and ICT members. So I'll dive in with just a couple of starter questions and we'll go from there. So I think it's important for people to take a step back and have you explain kind of the ecological significance of Tibet so that we can orient from there. Perhaps Lobsang, you would like to jump in on that?
Sure. Thank you, friends. So, in terms of ecological significance of the Tibet, one obviously it's water resources. The second is the kind of glaciers that Tibet plateau stores, and glaciers being the major sources of Asia's rivers. So it's really important, not only for Tibet but also for the downstream nation as well. And then with the Tibetan plateau, we also have a huge permafrost, and which really helps to sink the carbon dioxide. So that's also in terms of climate change, and in terms of protecting the ecosystem. Permafrost is really important. But then right now the problem is the rapid permafrost melting is another major problem that we see on the Tibetan plateau. And then finally, I would like to highlight in terms of grassland. I mean, grassland, the huge Tibet has a huge land that is covered by grassland, and the kind of livelihood that people, Tibetan nomads, have lived for thousands of years is very sustainable, I mean ecological, sustainable. And so that in a way also helps the whole Tibetan plateau, and then also in a way helps the global climate change, I mean controlling, and then also the downstream nation as well. So I feel that with its significance, these are the major issues that I mean really helps the to sustain the Tibetan plateau, and then helps the downstream or its neighboring countries. Thank you.
Seshi, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, on top of the environmental factors that Lobsang pointed out, like the permafrost, the glaciers, the rivers, um, there's also a huge, we have huge rare earth and precious metal reserves inside Tibet. And these are stored in like up in our deserts, up in the highlands, and the mining activity that goes around these rare earth metals is it's a huge concern for a lot of the downstream countries. And on top of the rivers and the permafrost and the grasslands that Lobsang has been talking about, there's the human factor of development and infrastructure that has been a major issue with damming the rivers, mining the rare earth metals, removing and banning the nomads from the grasslands. All of the human elements of the environmental degradation in Tibet is so intertwined and so important to talk about too.
Uh, Before we turn go deeper into the water issue, I just wanted to ask another follow-up question on the grasslands. There's a serious myth out there, not just related to China, that grasslands and nomadic grazing on them is an ecological problem, right? We have the same thing seen in the United States, elsewhere in the world. So I would like if you could comment on that issue. And of course, I already said that I think it's a kind of a myth, but if you could expand a little bit on how that really works in the scientifically.
Yeah, sure. In terms of so with the grasslands, what the Chinese government and the Chinese scientists are purporting is that with the nomads grazing their yaks, their sheep, their goats up in the grasslands is degrading, and they're saying that it's leading to desertification of the grasslands. So it is not so much scientifically proven. It is more a tool for colonization. It's a tool of control to put the blame of desertification of the grasslands on the nomads. Lobsang can talk more about the science behind what is actually happening in the grasslands. But for me, I totally see it as a tool of colonization and removing the nomads from the grasslands, removing them from their traditional culture, removing them from their landscape, their ancestral landscape, and placing them into these reservation towns. That's what I see. Lobsang, if you can talk about the science behind desertification.
Yes, one I think with the desertification on the Tibetan plateau is that because of the rising temperature that we see on the Tibetan plateau, so that is also another one reason of massive grassland turning into desertification. And then, as Siju mentioned in earlier, infrastructure development, the massive infrastructure development that we see on the Tibetan plateau also has led to the desertification on the grassland. So grassland, I think right now turning into a desert is a major concern that every Tibetan, inside Tibet, they do really raise about that. But then. Even the IPCC, report also highlighted by saying that Tibetan nomads and the grasslands are the ones who should be protected, and they should be part of the whole ecological conservation, and whole they should be part of whole this movement. But then how Chinese government responded with in the name of ecological conservation, removing whole Tibetan from the the grassland, and then getting control of the land. And so recently we have also witnessed how Chinese government sometimes, as Sichu mentioned, the colonialism, sometimes in the name of, green energy or ecological conservation, I mean, people get manipulated and policies are formulated in the name of ecological conservation, but not really benefiting that policies to the local community who are located. So what we see nowadays is Chinese government, they see that Tibetan Plateau is a huge land of solar and wind energy. And so the Chinese government is building massive solar panels on the grassland. And so these solar energy would be diverted or carry forward on the north of China, and not really benefiting the local people. So these kind of, I mean, policies that we see, which is not ecological sound, and it doesn't really benefit the grassland, and or it doesn't really benefit the nomads who are on the grassland for thousands of years. So it's major concern. It's not only the Tibetans who are raising concern on this issue. Even the Chinese, many of the Chinese scholars say that nomads should be protected, grasslands should be protected, nomads should be part of the ecological conservation. But then, such as the cases of Sangjang Nature Reserve, where heads of the three resources, where they say that nomads are removed, but then there are various research saying that nomads being removed from this area has not benefited their livelihood and has not benefited the grassland as well.
So I think it's time to switch more directly to the official topic here of the rivers and the waters. Before we do that, I just, Lobsang, for those who may not be aware, can you just say what the IPCC is?
IPCC is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And so, I mean, this group is major. It's I mean, all the scholars are also has some relation with the governments. And once they release a report, they have a working, committee, and the scholars, they release a report which has been consulted and referred by the UN climate change conferences and other major policymakers. So the
it's
report,
kind of a like a, my understanding is it's a very definitive, comprehensive look globally at climate change. It's just the acronym may not have been what everybody recognizes. So thank you for that. So then, I've already mentioned some of this, that I want to go back to a few points. Setting aside the, potential of clean energy defined as you rightly did as solar and wind. uh, there's a lot of rhetoric that comes out of the Chinese Communist Party that the only way that it can meet its climate targets is more and more and larger hydroelectric dams on the 8 rivers that are sourced from Tibet. So if you guys could maybe tag team, and Seshu, maybe give us a start, is what are some of the dangers of the continued building and operating, and the effectiveness of these large projects?
I don't know if we can show a picture of how massive these dams are. These are like ginormous dams that it's not your run of the mill dams. It's those mega dams that can power many, like, entire cities. And these dams are being placed right, they're being placed within the plateau on these rivers, and these are rivers that cross many borders. They have to feed more than 1 billion people. And when it is turned off, and when it is impeded right up in the upstream area, then the downstream region, they're going to be very, very vulnerable to. So this is the whole geopolitical issue of not having water treaty rights between upstream and downstream nation, and this is something that the PRC is completely taking advantage of, and they're using it as a control mechanism for the downstream nations. So in terms of like, if you just go online and look at the pictures of the Three Gorges Dam, the dams on the dam planning on Yarlung Sangpo. If you look at those pictures, you can see what a massive ecological issue they will pose. I mean, when something is that big, there's going to be sediment issue with sediment going downstream. These sediments are so integral to how the downstream farmers, how they provide nutrition for their farm, nutrition for their land to grow and produce. And then with the fish migration, with the bird migration, there's all these flora and fauna impacts of these dams. And then there's a human side of it. These dams have been known to have seismic activity around it because of their sheer scale. Um, yeah, and then the geopolitical issue of control, with the lack of transparency around um, sharing the plans for how these dams will be used, and how all of this water and energy, it's not for the nearby communities. The nearby communities are the ones who are being relocated and displaced to other reservations, most likely. So these dams are purely there to serve the greedy needs of developing the urban population of China. But Lawson, I can talk more about the science behind these dams.
And I'd be particularly interested, on top of whatever you want to focus on, but there's a lot of risks that have been raised already by Seshu, but and I'm sure you'll speak to some more. But my understanding is that there's also kind of this vicious cycle that uh, the very climate change goal that is being used as potentially, one might say, an excuse to build these is actually making the dams more vulnerable to. And I'd like you to finish that sentence for me. It's making the dams more vulnerable. And please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. And then obviously destroying the whole ecosystem. I would like to, give more emphasis on the Brahmaputra, and as China has always, focused more on clean energy, and I feel like the major countries and also the big, dam developing companies, they are promoting hydropower dams, but then not really understanding the whole fragile ecosystem of the Tibetan plateau. And then, the whole Tibetan plateau itself is also very sensitive with the earthquakes. And so if we see, Chinese government continues to build dams on the upstream of these major rivers, then, dams could also, leads to, earthquakes, or earthquakes can also, destroy the whole dam projects, and then giving a lots of negative impact on the people and ecosystem, and also the downstream nation as well. So as Siju earlier mentioned, that there is no transparency, and Chinese government is in fact, taking advantage of the whole nature of the, these transboundary rivers. Tibet being the head of the sources of these major rivers, then Chinese government not sharing or not having any water treaty with its downstream nations. And suppose with the Brahmaputra on Yarlung, India and Chinese government and also Bangladesh, they don't have any water treaty agreement. So there is no international transboundary water agreement on Brahmaputra as well. And then when Chinese government, when they continues to build dams, the neighboring countries or the downstream countries, they remain silent. And so in a way, it will also have an impact on their people as well. And so in this whole process of Chinese government in the name of clean energy, when we look at the grassland policies or also or the dam construction on the international rivers, there is no participation of local people in this whole climate policy or decision making. And then participation of communities and gender equal participation, and at the same time there is no independent environment impact assessment has been carried forward. So I think right now, I feel that the downstream nations are not only the states but also the civil societies and communities, environmental NGOs. We should come together and then raise this concern, because I mean the kind of climate change that we see nowadays on whole Himalaya belt, not only in Himalaya belt, all over the world, the floods that we see, the fires and wildfires. So it's very worrisome, and then frontline communities are the ones they get most affected by these climate change policies. So it's a I feel that it's a time that everyone should come together and then raise our voices and make the big states or the big companies accountable, and then hopefully to bring positive changes.
Thank you very much. I to pick up on two of the things you guys said. One is it's becoming more and more emphasized in riparian issues and management that the rivers are transboundary, right? So they have to be managed more in from that perspective of cooperation to avoid problems, but also increase benefits. And we've seen some of that. I will talk again about how wonderful it was to have you at the Stockholm Water Week conference, and that was a theme. Right, we saw some examples of how this can be done in a proper way, and it begins with that willingness and the information flow. And I found it interesting that you said that about no water treaties. Is there any more you can expand on that, or if there's ways you can compare that to places where it's being done in a more functional way?
I think in terms of water treaties, I mean, there has been always a more focus from international water treaty agreement on the South Asia. But then within the South Asia, I feel that there should be also regional, norms and practices that can also, in a way, manage the whole river system. And I also would like to say that, I mean, water, it's a river is supposed to be, flow naturally, it's not our power or it's not our role to manage or control the river. Let the river flows, I mean, it's a natural ecosystem. And then if we damage the whole natural ecosystem or the natural phenomena, then it will definitely have a lots of impact. And then in terms of water management, I mean, how states can come together. I mean, suppose with the Indus River, India and Pakistan has a, Indus Water Treaty. And then in that, the third party like World Bank has, taken initiative, and then they have also involved in that. So in that case, I think that even in Brahmaputra River, they if they could be also possibility of third party, coming together and then bringing all the nations, on the table, and then having some positive involvement. And then I also feel that earlier in the beginning we talked about traditional knowledge and the traditional practices and the local communities, the whole community who have lived on these whole international rivers. They have their own traditional methods and understanding, and knowledge on to, on the river system. And I think both from Tibet, in Tibet's area, where we have a Tibetans living near the river system, and then also in Arunachal and Assam, people have lived, and it's their culture, and they have a traditional literature and songs, and all these. I think that knowledge should come together, and then also I feel that there could
Think,
be a possibility of having them, yeah, having them in, yeah,
yeah.
bringing
I
a
wanted to
positive.
just circle back to one item in here and turn it over to Seshu, because there's this adage that I find very compelling, that where you exploit resources, you're often, if not always, exploiting people. And I'm curious how you would articulate that in the context of Tibet and the pretty obvious agenda of the Communist Party to erase Tibetan civilization writ large. So if you'd like to pick up that thread, it'd be great.
Yeah, I think the old adage you're referring to is water as peace, right? But here, it's absolutely being used to the contrary by the Chinese government. It is used as a tool of control, a tool of oppression, a tool of exacerbating the cultural genocide we've already been experiencing for the last 6 decades in Tibet. So it's absolutely just furthering their agenda of erasing the traditional lifestyle of Tibetans. It's furthering their agenda of putting in more control of Tibetans within Tibet, and then extending that control to the downstream nations in South and Southeast Asia, so that they stay silent about what's happening upstream and downstream. And then we have a huge something we haven't talked about much on this in this conversation today: the human rights, the environmental human rights defenders we have in Tibet. How there's a number of them who are in prison in Tibet, and they're in prison because they've spoken up about the environmental impacts, the human rights impact of what this crazy Chinese infrastructure development has been looking like. And and yeah, we cannot talk about the environment and climate change in Tibet without talking about the human rights issues, right? And with human rights, for the last 50, 60 years within the Tibetan issue, we've been focused so much on the human rights. And now there's a huge shift on talking about the environmental issues and using this opportunity to get Tibet to the global platform and using international platforms to highlight the environmental and human rights issues in Tibet. So yeah, focusing also on the environmental human rights defenders and how they are present, how Tibetans in Tibet cannot speak up about, their voices have been taken away, and we get arrested if we speak about what's happening to our communities.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to raise, and I thank you. I think some of us are talking about the environmental and human rights uh, crisis go hand in glove. It's a mistake to put them off into separate silos, which unfortunately does happen in some, especially in some important negotiations over the climate change. So I really appreciate that, and maybe we can expand a little bit on that, but of talking about, yeah, more, if you have any more on the ground examples of this happening, because let's bring it home with some personal stories, because that's really important, as you said, to give a voice to the voiceless. uh,
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
mean,
Dubs.
yeah, I would like to, I mean, before Sija, I would like to also add in terms of Tibetan environmental defenders. we have many cases of Tibetan intellectuals who have been arrested in the recent years, such as including Tugu Tenzin Delek Rinpoche, Kama Samdro, Kunga Tseyang, and also Rinchen Samdro. So these people have been involved in the environmental protection activities. But then what happens after certain time, at initial phase, you feel like there is some space, but then once they start the activities, environment protection activities, then they get arrested, and then they get jailed for 10 to 10 and 15 years, so which is very very sad. And also we have also right now in Tibet, local Tibetans, community, traditional leaders, communities, and monasteries and nunneries taking initiative in terms of environment protection activities like, waste management or tree plantations. So these activities should be also acknowledged by that. But then uh, the arrest of whole Tibetan environment defenders, I feel that at the international platform, we have not been able to receive much, support from the other, communities where they work in terms of release of the environment defenders. So I think this is one scope. I felt that, we can seek more collaboration with the other communities from all over the world, and then bring our environment defenders in their platform, and then have new collaboration and support from each other. I think that's one thing that we can do. So the kind of I feel that sacrifice and the protest that we see in Tibet, the artists and intellectuals, their contribution on whole Tibet's environment movement should. I feel that should acknowledged by the Chinese government. Sometimes, the kind of environment policies produced by the Chinese government, these policies are not even in Tibetan language, and we have Tibetans who speak and read Tibetans, but then not having policies in Tibetan language is completely, neglecting the importance of the Tibetan people, and it's also an act of colonialism. So I feel there is a major problem in that. So I would request, Sichula, to share your views.
Friends, you're muted.
I know. I'm going to just turn, because we're looking at the clock, to something you said earlier, and an area that I'm personally very interested in, and I think others would like to hear about, is the idea of the pursuit of green energy, setting aside hydroelectric, because I think we've all got a lot of skepticism about that. The solar and wind that you mentioned, these giant installations. We have to find solutions somewhere. But I feel there's a lot of evidence, and there's a lot of experiments out there, or even on the ground work being done, that integrate or co-manage the needs of the clean energy with the other benefits of herding and farming and all these other that are seen somehow as an either or choice. And we'd like to see if you could comment on that, but also in doing so, highlighting that there does seem to be choices that could be being made, and they're not.
Oh, okay. I can take. Oh well, I haven't found a solution yet in terms of I haven't found a solution, and also I haven't seen many solutions out there. Like even with the solar and the wind, I am really concerned. Like if there are mega solar farms that are put in Tibet and the deserts of China, I am really concerned about how this could also further displacement of traditional people in these landscapes. So I haven't found. I mean, I'm really looking for ways that we can still have solar farms and we can still have nomads and traditional people living in these landscapes. I haven't found a good solution for that. Only thing I've seen right now has been further displacement and further putting people into reservations. So I don't know, Lobsang, have you seen better solutions?
So it sounds like what you're saying is it's something that needs to be focused on instead of ignored.
Yes,
That's
absolutely. There
and
needs to
there
be better investment. I mean, if they're going to spend billions of dollars into mining, hydro, all these infrastructure development projects in Tibet, there needs to be better investment into actual clean energy that can actually be sustainable with the people who live there. So, um, yeah, bringing in more inputs from traditional knowledge, bringing in more inputs from how communities actually have lived and survived in these landscapes for so long, and tapping into the technological advancements that China has been so well known for, but also opening it up and making research and development more transparent to what's happening in the rest of the world. This opening up is what we really need to see, but so far I haven't seen it.
hopefully not our final, but potentially our final question to you, Lo Sung La, picking up on that, is there are mechanisms, right, that are used both locally, nationally, and internationally. They're often spoken, labeled, and environmental assessments. And you mentioned that earlier. I'd like maybe you to comment on what those are for people who may not know, and then um, how is China treating that kind of opportunity?
Sure. Thank you. Um, Environment impact assessment is a mechanism where every project developments or a project implementer or companies or states. So this assessment is supposed to carry before any they bring any projects on the land. And so this assessment is supposed to be an independent assessment of the development projects. But then, so this also kind of demands some kind of freedom and human rights protection and legal rights protection on the land. And with the case of Tibet, I feel like there is no independent environment assessment happening. Whereas even if there is some kind of, assessment, so it has been done by the Chinese government. So one policy that we can see is that recently the Chinese government were released a report policy in terms of the policy is called Qinghai Tibet Environment Protection Law. So, but then this law says that it's the local government who has the authority to um, implement the mining activities. So local government has an affiliation with the CCP, and so local governments are always in a rush to bring economic development, the so-called economic development on the region where they will get in a way in a long term. They get a promotion. There is a personal gain, and so for them, economic development is more important than environment protection. So this, in a way, also proves that it doesn't bring any better mechanism or environment impact assessment. And the second is that to have a very independent, strong environment NGO is really really important. But then in China, it's all government related NGOs, and so this also gives a lots of negative feedback on how you bring projects, and then that can also in a way supports the environment and not really impacting the local people. So I feel that Chinese government, for them, if they want to seen by world as the global climate leader, or they want to promote the green energy, or the carbon, they talk about whole protection and global climate change, or the adaptation and all. But then the basic factors are really really important in terms of having an independent environment NGOs, protecting the human rights, and then climate change and then protecting the environment is also being a part of human rights, then acknowledging the local people participation of local communities. So these components should come together, and then only they can have really, I mean, green policies. Otherwise, in the name of economic development, as you mentioned earlier, the kind of economic development which doesn't really benefit the local people, but then they ways to extract as much as possible to get the benefit to the non-Tibetans or the Chinese. So this is what would we see in Tibet right now.
Great. So I think we are coming to a close, but I did want to open the floor if, and I'll start with you, Tsechu, is if you have any other, closing comments that you want to share with the audience, especially something that I may have missed in asking questions. So please.
No, I think my final push would just be to stress on, you know, the topics we've talked about, but also to, we really need to, with climate change and, environmental degradation, human rights, all of that in the forefront of the international platform, we really need to bring Tibet. We really need to, if not Tibet, the Tibetan plateau, we need to bring these issues from Tibet to the forefront. We need to, step up to the international platforms and use this global limelight to stress on the importance of Tibet being a third pole, Tibet being a powerhouse of traditional knowledge that our nomads and our people have been using for centuries, and then also stressing on the human rights environmental defenders we have in Tibet and how they're imprisoned, and how, these are excellent segues to get the Tibetan issue into, finding solidarity with other movements, but also, pushing our agenda forward of human rights and environmental protection in Tibet to the forefront too. So that's my final say.
Lobsang La, would you?
Yeah, I think even I feel that what Situ has raised, I want to also add a little bit more on that. At the whole international, forums and platforms, when everyone talks about, climate, there are hardly anyone who would bring issue of climate change in Tibet or water security in Tibet as well. So right now, currently, I feel that, you know, at the international platforms, nobody really talks about Tibet's environment. So I feel that, the especially, like-minded and or allied and countries like US or other European countries, I mean, they have been doing some, I mean, great initiatives, and but then I feel that there is need of more of active, involvement and actions on that. And then similarly, the neighboring countries or the downstream countries of Tibet, I feel that they should take a more proactive, role and then raise these concerns, because at the global climate change, the COP meetings, Tibet does not have official representation, because and at the COP meetings, they don't have any official delegation of stateless people or occupied nations. So we are not in a global climate, official negotiation table. So it's a really, I think, concerning issue that we see. And then, yes, I mean, at one point, these big, meetings are important. But then I think at the same time, finding allies or, I mean, solidarity with the also environment NGOs, civil society, universities, researchers, scientists, and we should find, platforms and opportunities in all these areas. And then I think we can have some positive changes. And then finally, always, remembering the sacrifices that Tibetans inside Tibet have done in terms of environmental protection. So they sacrifice and then, be right now, and many of them are still in jail, so it's for me, I mean, personally, it's I think really helps me to want to focus a little bit more when I think of their sacrifices. And thus I feel that, every one of us, we should always remember their sacrifices, and then find, even among us ourselves, Tibet groups, researchers, activists or students, we should also collaborate and, and work together. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for sharing all of your experiences and deep scientific knowledge and everything else you've been able to share with our community and with our audience. And we'll be sure that it gets out as far and wide as possible. So, again, thank you for participating and look forward to when we can all speak again.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you again to Lobsang and Seshula for joining us for this Tibet talk. And thank you to all of you who are watching and listening to this. I'd like to apologize. I understand that there were some technical issues earlier, but hopefully you can all see me and hear me correctly now. And at this point of the conversation, I'd like to bring in my coworker who just led that discussion with Lobsang La and Seshula, and that is ICT's Government Relations Director, Franz Matzner. So let's get Franz into the conversation here. Hi, Franz.
Hey, hello.
Thanks for joining us, Franz. And for all of you who are watching this live, I'd like to say that if you have any questions for Franz about this discussion, Franz has an extensive background in environmental advocacy as well. And he was part of that World Water Week conference in Stockholm that I mentioned earlier. And so if you'd like to ask any questions relating to this discussion about Tibet's rivers, please share them in the comment section of our Facebook Live post, or email them to comments@savetibet.org. And we have a few minutes left here where Franz will be able to answer those questions. But as those questions are coming in, Franz, let me start with you right now and ask you, what are some of your big takeaways from that discussion with Lobsang La and Seshula?
Sure. Thank you very much. There's I'll try to zero in on three because they covered so many different interlocking, very important issues. To me, one of the takeaways is the concept of self-determination. The term wasn't used, but when you look at what's happening in Tibet, there's kind of a cascade effect. The Tibetan people are being left out of what is their lands and their traditional knowledge in discussions, or let's not even call them discussions, in kind of an iron fist top-down development approach. And when the people are left out, bad decisions are made. And when you consider that, then it's taking away the self-determination of all the downstream countries as well, and all of the people there that depend on the rivers. They can't make their own independent decisions. They have to constantly be reacting to the threat of China, who has the higher ground. The second thing I want to emphasize is the point around traditional knowledge. This theme also came up very much in the World Water Week discussion panels, and I think it's very important to emphasize one aspect. There's, I think, some misunderstandings out there about what traditional knowledge really means. For many, it's not, obscure, but for some it is. And something I learned at the conference is it's important to understand that these are systems. They're not, some, uncivilized or, prehistoric or whatever word we want to use in the propaganda that the Chinese government often uses to set that apart or denigrate it. These are, scientific systems that have been used for thousands of years to manage resources so that they can be sustainable. And I think that's a very important part of the equation that's often left out. And then the third thing that I'll also emphasize is the idea that also was a theme at World Water Week of using water for peace. There's peace is not just the absence of overt conflict. It's trust that the peace is going to be sustained and that people are going to benefit from it. And clearly what our panelists depicted and emphasized is there is not that security. That security doesn't exist for the Tibetan people. It doesn't exist for the downstream people that all depend on the healthy flow of these rivers. So that is something that I think the international community needs to emphasize, hold China accountable, and also demand that there be a cooperative approach that has been successful in other riparian systems, or at least is being worked towards. So that is a critical part of any riparian system management, and you'll see a theme here that China has choices to make here.
Thank you very much, Franz. And you mentioned a couple times in your response the World Water Week panel that you were able to attend yourself in Stockholm. And as I mentioned, ICT was very proud to sponsor that event, and it was convened by the U.S. State Department in partnership with the International Water Management Institute. So a very important event. You were there yourself in Sweden. Can you tell us a little bit about what that experience was like?
It was fantastic. It was really inspiring and eye-opening. The scale of the participation, I think it was like 190 or more countries coming together, government officials, experts, all focused on how the water crisis can be addressed. That was one of the most stunning facts that I think emerged. You know it in your head, but when it's said over and over again, is that by 2025, 50% of the world's population will be facing water scarcity, which is a stunning statistics considering the timeline we're looking at, and that's definitely exacerbated by climate change. This is a global issue, and that really was that came home hard being there, but also the kind of inverse is just how many people are engaged in trying to address this in a cooperative manner, and it was really inspiring.
Thanks, Franz. Like I said, ICT was really pleased to be part of that event, and grateful to the State Department and the Institute for convening that, and to all the speakers who took part in it, including Lobsangla and Seshula. We're getting close to the end of the program here. We have a couple minutes left, but I do have a question here that came in by email from Gordon K. Wood. And Gordon, thank you so much for your question. Franz, does China plan to mine rare earth elements on the Tibetan Plateau? They would be repeating the environmental and epidemiological atrocities they created at Bayan Obo in Inner Mongolia. Then 2 billion lives and livelihoods would be at risk. So, Franz, what's your response to that, or is there anything you'd like to elaborate on that we've already heard in response to Gordon's question?
I think that our guests today really touched on this in directly. So I can only add one or two points, and one is that the mining tailings, which is the pollution that comes from large-scale mining, are likely what's being referred to here, and they flow downstream as well as into the local environment. And particularly if they're not done with the proper environmental safeguards, which we've just heard they're not, they are highly polluting and can cause a lot of health issues to everybody within the vicinity and further away. And the simple answer is yes, that's happening. The rare earth metals are already being mined, and there's growing concern about how China intends to use its lithium, which is we're all starting to realize is a critical metal.
Thank you very much, Franz. Before we wrap up, then, are there any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience? Anything that you'd like to add to what we've already discussed today to leave our viewers with?
Yeah, there's just one piece of what both of the panelists here raised is the idea of choices. I think that this needs to be emphasized that the PRC has choices to make on how they interact with the international community, how serious they are about meeting their targets, and being honest about sharing information. And as Seshula said, like investment, that there's an importance in investing in human rights and environmental issues. And just draw one more example back to clean energy. There is a lot going on all around the world, experiments, pilot projects, and even work happening already on the ground on integrating different needs from solar panels and wind farms so that they can be integrated with farming needs, sorry, and other, and this could easily be integrated with nomadic lifestyles and traditional ways of life. Or maybe we shouldn't say easily because it still needs to be worked on. But that's a really good example of ways that we could be looking, and China specifically could be looking at choices instead of its dismissal of human needs and its downward iron fist approach.
Thank you so much, Franz. And that's going to have to be our last word for today. So I think that's a good word for us to end on, kind of looking forward to what needs to be done now. So thank you so much for being here, Franz. Thank you for leading that conversation. And thank you to, once again, Lobsang Lansa Shula for being here and for all of their work to help protect Tibet's rivers and to make the world aware of the crisis that's happening there. And thank you again to all of you who are watching and listening to this program. We'll be back next month in our next episode of Tibet Talks, and you can tell Franz's dog is very excited for that.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe the commentary I hear over and over again on this topic.
Absolutely. So we hope you'll all join us again next month. Until then, as we always say on Tibet Talks, stay safe, stay well, and stay active. Jujiche.